Hey, I'm Vanessa Maria Graber, and you're watching and listening to the People Power Lunch Hour on Philly Cam TV and on WPPM LP in Philadelphia. On today's show, we're going to be talking about how to build power and capacity in social movements. I'll be joined in the studio here at Philly Cam with organizers from March on Harrisburg, the First Unitarian Church, and also from the Power Coalition. We're going to be talking about the issues and campaigns that they've been working on, an event that they're having this weekend here in Philadelphia to build more capacity for their movements. Stay with us. We'll talk about all that and more when we be right back. Hey, welcome back to the People Power Lunch Hour show here at Philly Cam. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber. On today's show, we're going to be talking about building capacity for local organizing and social movements here in Philadelphia with 3 organizations that are working on social, economic, and racial justice issues. I'm joined here by organizers from the March on Harrisburg, the Power Coalition, and the First Unitarian Church in Philadelphia. They are having an event called Join the Democracy Movement, and it is this Saturday, March 3rd at the First Unitarian Church. And it's an invitation to people from the public to learn more about their organizations and to join their campaigns. On today's show, we're going to talk a little bit about the work that they are currently engaged in and tell you, our listeners and viewers, how you can get involved with these campaigns. So first, I'd like to welcome Luana from the First Unitarian Church, Luana Goodwin, and you are co-chair of the host committee. Can you tell us about this event? And because we were first contacted by the First Unitarian Church, and many people are not maybe familiar with a lot of the social justice work Unitarian churches are engaged in across the country. Can you tell us about why you decided to join with March on Harrisburg and the Power Coalition to put on this event?
Sure. Thank you, Vanessa. Unitarians across the state of Pennsylvania are organized and working together under an organization called UU Plan. That's Unitarian Universalist Pennsylvania Legislative Action Network. And as such, we have identified a number of areas of concern in terms of public policy that we want to address together. Unitarians don't have a fixed creed of faith, but we do have certain principles, among them being the dignity and worth of every individual. And we feel that in order for the dignity and worth of every individual to be recognized, there must be a democratic process, both within our congregations and within our communities. And so we are committed to working toward enriching our democracy. And so this is a natural joining for our denomination and our congregation to this effort to lift up the fact that our democracy seems to be in some danger at the moment. People at base are disgruntled with it, don't think that it's working for them, that it's recognizing them, and as a whole are pulling back from participation, and therefore are allowing the larger, I wouldn't say larger, the corporate and power interests that would subvert democracy for their own uses and their own ends. And so we are joining with other faith communities, with other political and social movements to try to address this problem.
Thank you so much. My next question is for Reverend Nicholas O'Rourke, who's a community organizer with the Power Coalition, which is an interfaith coalition here in Philadelphia made up of various churches, nonprofit organizations, and other organizers. Can you tell our listeners and viewers about the Power Coalition and some of the issues that you've been hoping to address here in the city?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for having all of us on today. Power is an acronym for people or Pennsylvanians or Philadelphians organized to witness, empower, and rebuild. It's an interfaith justice movement. We like to fancy ourselves as focused on racial and economic justice. And so we are in partnership and in coalition, as it were, membership with some 40 to 50 congregations here in the city of Philadelphia, some 20 to 25 out in the common and the metro counties, Bucks County, Delaware County, Chester County, as well. And also spreading out now into the center of the state in Lancaster and York counties, where we hope to be able to build out people of moral courage and faith to work on an array of issues that we work on, namely education funding, jobs and wages. We have an economic dignity campaign that works often with Fight for 15 and SEIU and various other organizations here in the city. We work on mass incarceration and policing here in the city. We are members of the Coalition for a Just DA and the No 215 Jail Coalition that has done such amazing work in this city in pushing for restorative justice practices and progressive criminal justice reform, looking at health care, an array of different things that we're working on. And so currently, I specifically myself working with our congregations in West Philadelphia and Center City, of which First Unitarian is one. I'm also working to end money bail here in our city. For those that may know, most recently the City Council passed a resolution to call on the District Attorney's Office as well as the First Judicial District to stop its reliance on money bail, and also on the General Assembly and the Supreme Court to change the laws in the same manner. The thought here is that in a place like Philadelphia, arguably the poorest big city in the country, 26% of our population is living in deep poverty. You have folks who are sitting in jail that are not going to be even seen by a judge for upwards of 8 months. And if you're unable to make bail, some 40% can't even pay $100 to get out, then your life can easily be thrown away for a misdemeanor or a nonviolent charge. And we don't think that's just, we don't think that's moral. And so we think that if we're going to have folks going through the justice system, they should be treated justly. That it should not be in such a way that it's almost better for you to be rich and guilty than it is for you to be poor and innocent. We want to take money out of the system, take finance out of that system, and make it a more just system where people who need to be in there are in there, and those who should not and can be with their families preparing to go to court can be out and maintain their lives as they should. So those are some of the things that we're working on, I'm working on specifically, and we're trying to keep our hands in as many things as possible to let people know that faith and moral courage is something that is still effective and important in policy and society today.
Certainly, and we always see the Power Coalition out in the streets when Philly Cam is covering direct actions. You are certainly building power here in Philadelphia. So next, I'm joined by Reid and John Randolph. John, who has the mic from March on Harrisburg, and we've had March on Harrisburg on People Power Lunch Hour a few times, talking about corruption and state politics, working very hard to end gerrymandering and to pass a bill ending gifts for legislators. So welcome back. We love the work that March on Harrisburg is doing. For listeners and viewers who don't know, tell people about your campaign to get money out of politics.
Reid, why don't you tell people?
Sure. So, you already know a bit about us, but we're a nonpartisan, volunteer-driven group, and thanks for having us again. And so Pennsylvania is the 5th most corrupt state in the country. We learned that through John and I and a few others of us met seeking to get money out of politics at the federal level, and we realized we had a real problem here in our state that needed attention. And so we came up with a plan that we think would be very direct, which is specific legislation that exists, and putting this legislation in our legislators' hands and saying, why are we not acting on anything? There hasn't been a significant reform in Pennsylvania in a decade that I can name that's worthwhile. And so it continues to get worse, and we have a process that we think will be very effective, and so that's identifying the legislation. Right now we have the gerrymandering bill, the bribery bill, they call them gifts, we call them bribes, and also an automatic voter registration bill. And so we identify the bills, we lobby with our legislators. We've met with 240 of the 253 legislators. There are a lot of them, and so that's another way that things don't happen, is they can just say, we don't know much about that, or there are thousands of bills. So we bring these specific bills up, we tell the people about it, and then we march behind them. And inevitably, when the legislature is non-responsive, which is what they do, we also practice nonviolent direct action. And that is our First Amendment right to make our case even clearer. And we think this method will work to pass specific legislation. And we've made great grounds behind those bills already. And we have some really key obstructionists in Harrisburg that we're focused on. The levers of power end up being, of those 253, about 5 people that control everything. And so telling people about this and identifying how the money really corrupts the system, and that's what it comes back to. And so I'll let you talk about what we're doing with that.
I'd like to talk specifically about the Independent Citizens Commission for Redistricting, or SB 22, HB 722 in the House. I think the state is, many people in the state are celebrating this recent decision that's resulted in our congressional districts being redrawn, and in some places, I live in the old District 7, the most gerrymandered district in the state, and one of the most gerrymandered in the country, and now it's the PA5 district, and it's most likely a Democrat that will win this district. So the primary is going to be very important in the district. So as people celebrate, I want to remind people that this is just a temporary solution to a gerrymandering problem. The bill that we support forms an independent citizens commission to redistrict. It takes the power out of the hands of legislators. They have too much power. They have too much skin in the game. And so this would put the power in the hands of the people, for Democrats, for Republicans, and now 3 independents would also be on that commission. So we would hear from those voices, and we're asking for more fair districts to be drawn. And so as people are thinking that the problem is solved, it is not. And I would remind people that to make this commission a reality, you have to pass it in 2 consecutive sessions. To amend the Constitution, the Pennsylvania Constitution. And if we want to have this in place by the time of the next census and next district drawing, then we have to pass it by June 30th of this year. If it's not done then, it could be 2032 until we have another chance at this. So we need to put the pressure on now. We're very excited. We have in the House 109 co-sponsors on HB 722. That's a strong majority of Republicans and Democrats who have come together to say that we need an independent citizens commission. And in the Senate, we're doing very well. We just signed on the 19th senator. So in the Senate, 26 would be a majority in the Senate. We're looking to see that happen. But Senator Fulmer has lived up to his promise to us. He said once the lawsuit was over, that he would put the bill up into committee hearings, and he has done what he said, and we're very happy with Senator Fulmer. It's scheduled for March 27th, and we're hoping that everyone calls in and tells Senator Fulmer how happy they are that he's lived up to his promise, and we want to see that bill come to fruition. Okay.
Could either of you elaborate more on gerrymandering and what that actually, how that practice negatively disenfranchises voters? I think, while they're passing the microphone, if you look at Philadelphia's district map, you'll see that it's a very odd looking shape and seems to kind of cover certain neighborhoods. So it doesn't make any sense to me, you
The
know.
First congressional district, which
Yes.
is Bob Brady, yeah.
That's right.
And so, you know, this was a bipartisan issue in 2012 when the maps were drawn, where a couple Democratic leaders sided with the Republican majority to create a map that would keep their seat state. And what that does is it disenfranchises a lot of people, where you have no representation in a lot of neighborhoods and a lot of districts, a lot of counties. So what they do is they pack them, crack them, and stack them. They move us around in ways that they can ensure a majority. So right now, the majority party, the Republicans, hold 13 of 18 congressional seats, while the registration for voters in Pennsylvania is nearly split 50-50, actually an edge to Democrats. So that's what that does, is it gives a solid majority to the party that has less votes. Democrats do the same thing in Maryland. And so you have places like Reading where there is no congressman that lives in Reading. So you have no one representing that area. You have a place like Erie, which was traditionally a swing state, swing area, purple, that has now has 2 solidly red districts. And so that's what it does, is it takes the voices away from the people, and no one really represents these communities anymore. They have no vested interest to answer to constituents. And so we need to take that process out of legislators' hands. I mean, it's really a no-brainer at this point. Both parties would like to hold that power. So right now, the congressional districts, we did have the lawsuit win, which will make things fairer for a short period of time. But that will be legislation through lawsuits every several years. We will have to revisit that. And Democratic leadership is planning on, during the next redistricting, they have the judge advantage, so they will have the power during the next redistricting. So they are not telling their constituents that, and so we're trying to spread that message. We found out, through lobbying, that there are certain people that hold this power. Those representatives are not telling their constituents that they plan on drawing things their way. And so we want to put it in the hands of people and create fair districts. You know, that's what it's about.
Sounds simple enough.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to pass that to Reverend Nicholas, how do we educate people in Philadelphia, especially people who, have low literacy levels, who maybe are not college educated, people who maybe have been isolated and disenfranchised from the political process? Where do you begin to kind of break down these really complex issues and get them to understand how it affects them?
Great question. One of the things that Power is principally rooted in is the idea of relationships, that the lion's share of our work, our ability to be able to mobilize masses of people to move in an action or to be able to be a part of a campaign that's strategically figuring out how to address issues, is by one-to-one relationships, really getting to know the people that we call members or friends or partners in this work. And so obviously with the amount of congregations of varying faith traditions that we have a part of Power, we have an opportunity to really dig deep in those congregations and speak with folks. And so that's one of the first things that we do, is constantly allow ourselves to be engaging in relationship and fellowship. If it's a cup of coffee, if it's a meal, if it's a meeting, whatever, we're constantly in conversation with folks and listening to them, allowing them to educate us about their experiences, about their life, and things like that, so we can find where the intersection is and work together. But on a broader way, some of the things that we have done to try to get people to understand, particularly around issues of criminal justice reform, is identifying those things in pop culture that are beginning to catch the attention of people and making it more easily accessible to them. Going into communities and identifying where people are interested in seeing documentaries like 13th, Ava DuVernay's 13th, which speaks to the issue of slavery still being a part of the actual American Constitution, and also how the criminal justice system and mass incarceration is a major issue in our country. America is the prison capital of the world, and so we found that with the screenings of this documentary and with discussions with folks, many people were able to wrap their heads around a very, very wide issue, very dense issue. And we do that often. Sometimes we'll have discussions around small pieces or articles that may come out to really help people ask the questions that they need and try to find the answers if we don't. But really, again, it's really relationship building. It's really identifying what people are interested in and allowing them to tell us what they want to work on, as opposed to trying to force issues on other people.
Right. And listening is definitely a big part of it. And I find that people know more than you think, but it's people like us who connect the dots for them. Can you tell me, Luana, why an interfaith coalition is important for the Unitarian Church to work with other faiths, other people from other congregations?
Well, again, it's sort of part of our resolve. It's also practically very necessary. We are, as a denomination, relatively small, and yet we recognize the value of many other faith traditions, and we recognize the moral and ethical roots that bind all of us together. And it is from these moral and ethical roots that political action grows. And so we find it empowering for ourselves and vital to a movement to work with others who share conviction, who have moral courage, who are willing to stand to represent that moral courage.
Yeah, I mean, these are moral issues, right? People, corruption, theft, unlawful imprisonment, mass incarceration. These are moral issues, right? And so I can see why people's faith would compel them to take to the streets and get involved. So this question is for Reid and John. Can you tell people about more of the direct action part? Because lobbying, of course, is a part of it, but we also know that doesn't always work. So what are some of the other events, activities, and actions that March on Harrisburg has done to raise awareness and also to, take a stand?
Reid, I think, knows more of the numbers, but I am a Waldo. So one of the
I thought you looked familiar.
one of our actions was to protest the legislature, or specifically Representative Metcalf, who sits at the head of the state government committee, who has refused to meet with us. And I was legislative coordinator, so I would spend my days setting up meetings in Harrisburg for our volunteers to go up and lobby in the Capitol, and I would always call Representative Metcalf's office and request, and then I'd pop my head in whenever we were there, had a nice relationship with the secretary, but I was always put off. I think every other legislative office was open to meeting with us, including Senator Fulmer, and we have to thank Senator Fulmer for his openness, but he refused, and we thought he is a very powerful person in our legislature. All three bills that we support were in the state government committee. Corruption bills end up there, and so we requested in the right process, in the right manner. But when he refused over a long period of time, I'm talking at least 8 months, because I started calling in December, maybe November of before our lobbying campaign. So my action was during our second march from Lancaster to Harrisburg, and we had the legislative calendar. It was right before Thanksgiving, and suddenly the legislature canceled session and mysteriously added Thanksgiving week as their session days, which I think is not very common for the legislature. So we came up with an action to say, where are legislators? I don't know if they were hiding from us, but it did seem suspiciously timed. So we met outside of Representative Metcalf's office, asked for a meeting, and then sat down when he refused. Nonviolent civil disobedience is only one of ways that we try to bring attention to these corruption issues. I would like to use this opportunity as we talk about nonviolent civil disobedience to quickly say that March on Harrisburg is helping to support the Poor People's Campaign in Pennsylvania. And so I heard Luana talking about morality, and it's a terrific segue to talk about the Poor People's Campaign. So Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris at the Cairo Center and Reverend Barber of North Carolina have come together to bring morality, the voices of the poor, to our legislatures. And so there will be actions in 32 states across the country in May and June of this year. And it's all centered around morality, the morality of our country. Where has it gone? And there will be 40 days of actions involving nonviolent civil disobedience. And I think we need to have that conversation and be comfortable with that idea that sometimes, like Reverend Martin Luther King showed us, that sometimes if we're not being heard, if the voices of the poor are not being heard, that nonviolent civil disobedience is necessary to wake people up. And I think we all need to come together to support the voices of the poor, and the Poor People's Campaign will be led by the poor and dispossessed. We're here to support. And so I want to put it out there that poorpeoplescampaign.org, or in Pennsylvania, it's pennsylvaniappc@gmail.com. You can get involved that way. So just wanted to put a plug in there.
Yeah, so the dates again for that campaign are May 13th through June 23rd, 6 weeks of nonviolent civil disobedience in 25 state capitals.
32 now.
That's 32. On these issues: ending the war economy, ending ecological devastation, ending systemic racism, and ending voter suppression. When we come back,
actually, can I correct you 1 second?
Sure.
It's no longer voter suppression. It's poverty, the umbrella of poverty. So I apologize if that was a mistake, and so I want to make sure we all understand. It's under the umbrella of poverty as the fourth plank. Okay.
No worries. Ending poverty. When we come back on People Power and Lunch Hour, we'll talk more about the intersectionality of all of these movements and how all of these organizations are essentially all fighting for the same thing, justice in our communities. I'm Vanessa Maria Graber. You're watching the People Power Lunch Hour on Philly Cam TV and listening on WPPM 106.5 FM. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the People Power Lunch Hour Show. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber. And on today's show, we're talking about building capacity and social movements and the morality of these movements and its intersectionality. I'm joined on today's show by organizers from local organizations here in Philadelphia that are working on social, economic, and racial justice issues. I have here in the studio Reverend Nicholas O'Rourke, a community organizer with the Power Coalition, John Randolph with the March on Harrisburg, Luana Goodwin from the First Unitarian Church, and Reid also from the March on Harrisburg. I'd like to begin talking about intersectionality because we're all working on many different things, but they seem to all be interrelated. Can you talk about the intersectionality of, getting money out of politics and mass incarceration and education and school reform? What are the things that they have in common, and how are they kind of overlapped?
Thank you again for the question. I'll speak specifically to the intersection that we see in our work around cash bail. We live in a carceral state. America is the prison capital of the world. I think it's estimated that 1 in every 3 male of color will be incarcerated in their lifetime, as opposed to 1 in 17 for males not of color. And so what we see here in Philadelphia, as I mentioned before, we're living in arguably the poorest big city in the country. And we know from data and from countless studies that there is an inextricable tie between poverty and crime. And so when you have, I think 72% of people who are being pretrial detained here in Philadelphia being people of color in the poorest big city in the country, you recognize that there's not just a race problem, there's a poverty problem, there's a financial issue. And so what we're trying to do is address the fact that in a country where there is a racial caste system at play, not because people are raging racist and things like that necessarily, but because there's a mindset of racial indifference, that we have to be able to uncover the fact that there are systems in place that are oppressing people of color simply because of where they fall on the financial system and things like that. And so we think that if we're able to address both racial injustice and economic injustice at the same time, we'll do a much better job at really alleviating some of the suffering that people are experiencing, particularly here in Philadelphia. I think 50-some-odd% of our folks are people of color that live in this city. And so when you see the fact that you have such a high poverty rate, you have such a high level of people of color that are living in the city, there's something that you have to do to be able to get at the intersection. So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and if people know Philadelphia history, they know that it was a manufacturing, textile, oriented industry. There was also the shipping, port industry, and there's a correlation too between the loss of thousands and thousands of jobs being outsourced or sent abroad, and this poverty and, a lot of even the drug crimes that are associated with these neighborhoods. There's research done by University of Pennsylvania where you overlay the maps between the warehouses and factories that close are the same neighborhoods that are being overcome with drugs and also with murders. So there's definitely a connection between all of that.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that is even overlooked right now, this a re-emerging conversation around gun violence prevention and things like that. Most folks understand that this is something that has been an issue within the black community and have been lifted up by people of color for a long time. And if we're going to talk about putting in some regulations around gun usage and gun sales and things like that, what has to happen also for young men and women of color in communities is replacing that with jobs. That the only way that we're going to start seeing a real decrease in the gun violence that we see is if there are opportunities that are expanding for people to be involved in that does not require for them to always have to be looking out for their own security, where the case may be, that requires firearms on their waist. So again, these are ways that or issues that we're seeing that are race issues first, but also made even worse by the lack of opportunity, the lack of money that's available for people to be able to build their lives the way they need to.
Yeah, and after the recession, Latinos and Black people in America, they lost wealth, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of wealth. And even in the last 60 years, another report was published this week that said African Americans had not gained much more wealth in the last 60 years. And even though many more are being educated, and that includes high school graduation and college graduation, more than ever are being incarcerated. There seems something really wrong with the system that is educating people more, but yet there's no social mobility, and in fact there's no economic mobility either. So what is the reason for this? Why aren't our legislators moved by our moral arguments? Because, right, I think, with the gun control issue, we're starting to see why they're not taking action on laws that people are advocating for that have real detrimental effects to the communities. I think that the Parkland High School students who are organizing got a very tough civics lesson after going to the Florida legislature and not seeing any movement on any form of gun control regulation. Why is that?
Why is that? Yeah. And so when you go to Harrisburg, it becomes very apparent. It's almost invisible at Harrisburg how corrupt the place is, because it is in every level. So it is just to be normal there. So it's about who our legislators are speaking to, and it's not the people. And so our executive director, Michael Pollack, uses a quote that when you have bribery and this sort of exchanging of money, the widow and the orphan's cases are not heard. And we talk about we're following the wrong golden rule. The man with the gold makes the rules. And so it's about communities not having any representation where laws are written. And ultimately, that's how change happens, is legislation is the most effective change. So we see our legislature being completely non-responsive. A Princeton study said that public opinion has near zero impact on public policy, whereas the donors have, about a 70% chance of passing legislation they care about. We have 30% or less. So right now there are 900 full-time lobbyists in Harrisburg. There are 203 gas lobbyists in Harrisburg. So when we can't pass an extraction tax, we're the only state who can't do that. It's because there are 203 people taking them out to dinner. And so that's where our bribery bill comes in. There were over $140,000 spent on expenses to legislators last year. And that's what's disclosed. They don't have to disclose anything under $250. So if they go out for a $200 dinner, they don't have to disclose that. That happens every night in Planet Harrisburg. It's its own place. And so when the people take their case there, and that's where nonviolent direct action comes in, is we say, we're shining a spotlight on what you're doing here, the party's over, and we're coming to take our house back, and we're going to write laws that make you responsive to the people. And then we'll see real change. And we're seeing this groundswell of movements, a movement of movements coming together. And in Florida is a great example where people are seeing that direct line to money, corrupting our politicians. 90% of us agree. So this is something that we agree on, which I think gives me great hope to, as desperate as these times are, it gives me great hope because you can knock on any door in Pennsylvania, and I've knocked on a number of them, and say, do you think money has too much influence in politics? And they're going to nod their head, and they don't ask you what party you're with. And so we just have to fix that. And we can go back to a place where there's normal debate on issues like gun control, and people are in agreement on that as well. So, become very obvious.
Yeah, if, you want to add something, Luana?
Well, as a social worker, and I've been in neighborhoods in Philadelphia, and met many wonderful people who are struggling with poverty. I'm still working in the public schools, volunteering in a school library 1 day a week. I recognize everything that Reid has said. It really is still almost difficult for me to believe that, those who are making public policy have no heart for those who are disadvantaged. And it is just a matter of being disadvantaged. These are people with capability, with a desire to do more, to do better. And it's just unjust to continue to deprive them, to have no regard for their state, and not use our public resources to enable people to contribute to our society, because this is what we're depriving ourselves. They are depriving us, those who would restrain resources and of all the benefits and the strengths that people who are kept under, in the undertow of our society. So I'm amazed at the hardness of heart that we're seeing these days, and I do think that a real uprising of people of goodwill, of people of moral courage again, can make a difference, and that's what we're about.
Well, the flip side to that is exactly what you said. There are all these people of goodwill that are now invigorated, who are energized, who are becoming civically engaged. I know that March on Harrisburg, people have a lot of love for one another. Could you talk about what happens when you engage in these actions and you build with people and you essentially create something out of nothing?
Sure. I can talk about our lobbying, meeting people in the cafeteria of the Capitol and talking to them about the bills, giving their assignments, going into meetings. Some people come and they've never met a legislator before, and they're scared to death to talk. And by the third meeting, they're starting to voice their concerns. And by the end of the day, they're empowered and they feel like, I can do this. I can speak my voice. I can talk to legislators and let them know how I feel about things. When we march, we spend full days on end in conversation with people that we may not ordinarily talk to about important issues, and it's beautiful. And I have to say, the UU churches have been so welcoming to our movement. We stayed in UU churches a majority of the time, and they fed us and made us feel safe and warm, and we are so thankful to your hospitality. That was, I made many friends this way. And then when we practice nonviolent civil disobedience, again, it's a feeling of empowerment. The ability to say, I'm right, and I'm standing up and defying authority is, I have the moral hand here. I'm speaking for the dispossessed. I'm speaking for the poor, and I'm willing to put my life or my freedom on the line here. And, for us, or for some of us, it's a simple misdemeanor, a ticket. For people of color or poor people, it could be a devastating setback to them. So for us, middle-class people, it's our responsibility to stand up for the poor and to risk arrest, because like I said, it's our responsibility to stand up for poor people.
A lot of the movements that are springing up right now are in a way reactionary, right? Certain laws or executive orders are written or incidents happen. However, your congregations, Reverend Orrick, have been around for a long time. How do we build movements that are long-term and sustainable, and not sort of these just reactionary, temporary, crash and burn movements that we've seen in other areas?
Well, it certainly is enticing to jump at every issue that comes across the way, but we have to recognize that we are lucky to be in a place like Philadelphia. We're lucky for our organization to have been birthed out of this town, because this is the birthplace of the Black Revolution. This is the birthplace of American Revolution. There is a deep sentiment here around really speaking truth to power and living into a more just society, even though we don't always manifest that, as we all know. But for us, it really is, as I mentioned earlier, about staying in constant communication with our community members, friends, partners. we have to constantly be an open book, or at least open ears to people as they share with us what they are feeling. What they are feeling. Issues that are coming out of the community, that are rooted in the community, not necessarily what's happening all the time coming from Washington or even in City Hall, but what is your neighbor feeling? What is your imam or your rabbi experiencing? What are your children experiencing in the schools? The community knows what they're going through. They know, they're experiencing it every day. They know best. We like to say during staff meeting that we want to make sure that we're centering in our work, learning making not ancillary but essential to our work the people that are closest to the pain. When we are connected to and in communication and in relationship with people who are at the center, at the heart of the pain, then we're not going to be reacting to anything. We're going to be thinking with them and learning from them about how we can construct a movement to alleviate that pain and to bring about legislation that's going to make that a tenable thing that's long term. The longer we stay in communication, people aren't going anywhere. The longer we stay in communication with them, they will let us know what we need to work on as opposed to responding to everything that gets chucked down to us from the top.
Yeah, and building those networks, right? Like ones that we have here, so that we can support and be in solidarity with one another as well. So I want to wrap up the show by again telling people or maybe inspiring them, like what are some of the ways they can get involved and why this issue is something they should care about. You want to start? Reid.
All right. So for March on Harrisburg and for me personally, and it's I'll admittedly a bit of an obsession. I can't stop seeing corruption everywhere. It ties to everything. So when we get these groups together to fight, the movement of movements, we're going to win. The people always win. And so, again, I'm really encouraged about that. I would tell people to, check out MarchOnHarrisburg.org. We're having an event at the First Unitarian Church this Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Power will be represented there. This is, we're touring 22 Unitarian churches in Pennsylvania, spreading the word about how corrupt our state is. Because no one knows. I didn't know. None of us knew. We found out, and it was really eye-opening. So we're spreading that message to people. We're also sort of doing that behind a book by Adam Icahn and Francis Moore-Lepay called Daring Democracy, which talks about the anti-democracy movement, which started in the 70s and was a calculated effort to disenfranchise people in favor of corporate interests. And what we're doing to respond to that. Not just resisting, but creating a democracy movement. And that's where we're headed. And so there's really exciting times. It's about being engaged, about contacting your legislators, about getting involved in your communities, meeting people, and finding that we all share these goals. We have a lot in common. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And Luana, how can folks engage with the Unitarian Church? Of course, the event is this Saturday, March 3rd, from 1 to 4 p.m. at the First Unitarian Church. And it's going to be featuring March on Harrisburg, Daring Democracy, the Poor People's Campaign, the Legislative Advocacy Network, and the Power Coalition.
Well, let me just say that we've invited many other activist groups in town to come and table and be a part of the conversation and present to those who are participating their particular agendas, their particular concerns, ways to be active. For example, Penn Environment will be there with issues of the environment, Ceasefire PA, Pennsylvania Health Advocacy Network, among others. So we've tried to draw in groups representing a breadth of issues, a breadth of responses, a breadth of possibilities in terms of action. And so we invite you to join us on Saturday between 1 and 4 and take away what you need to help you become a more active participant in democracy.
Great. John, can you mention the 3 bills that people can call and talk to their legislators about?
Of course. So the first is the Redistricting and Reform Commission in the Senate. That's SB 22. And in the House, that's HB 722. Please call mainly Senator Fulmer and Representative Metcalf, the heads of each state government committee.
I gotta say, Metcalf really wants to hear from all of you.
He loves calls.
Really wants you to
We all
call
wanna-
and contact him.
He's snuggly. The second is the gift band for legislators. In the Senate, that's SB 132, and in the House, that's HB 39. I think the automatic voter registration most likely will not happen this year because we have no Republican support. So I think I'll just leave it there. But it's important that people call and let their voices be heard to our legislature.
Great. And how can folks engage with the Power Coalition? They go to your website, find out more about your events.
Sure. Yes, we actually have a website, www.powerinterfaith.org. There you can find our calendar, access or links to the various campaigns that we're working on, overarching information, mission statement, vision statement, things like that, and opportunities for you to be able to contact us that way if you or your congregation are interested in joining with Power as we push forward this moral movement, so to speak, this people's movement as we're calling it this year, that you can do that as well. And so, of course, folks can reach out to me. I've even happened to share my information, my email account is NOROURKE, that's NOROURKE, at powerinterfaith.org. And I'll be happy to reach back out to you and answer any question that I possibly can. If I don't know the answer, then I'll do my very best to find it and get it to you. There are ample opportunities for folks to be involved. Usually actions are a great way for people to kind of come out. We usually do turn out for actions, and people find a way to kind of funnel into campaign work with us through that. And so that is a way, but also every month we have action team meetings where our various campaigns, all the campaigns that we work on, meet together under one roof once a month, usually on the second Tuesday of that month, normally at the Power offices. And so we encourage people that are interested in any of the things that I've lifted up today, or just want to see how they might be able to get involved. They can also do that as well. And the Power offices are 1429 North 11th Street on the campus of St. Malachi's Roman Catholic Church.
Great. I want to thank all of our guests that were on the People Power Lunch Hour show today. Reverend Nicholas O'Rourke with the Power Coalition, John Randolph and Reid Stever from March on Harrisburg, and Luana Goodwin with the First Unitarian Church. Their event is this Saturday, March 3rd from 1 to 4 p.m. at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia. Again, the democracy movement in Pennsylvania, the People's Campaign, and we'll be featuring speakers Adam Eichen, the co-author with Francis Morlap of Daring Democracy, Igniting Power, Meaning, and Connection for the America We Want, Rabbi Michael Pollack, and Reverend Gregory Holston. So you can check out this episode and all of our episodes of the People Power Lunch Hour at phillycam.org. Thank you for watching and listening to the People Power Lunch Hour. I'm Vanessa Maria Graber. See you next week.